And welcome to Handmade Hero Show, where we code a complete game live on stream. We are doing some level generation stuff today because we have kind of come to the point where, we're a bit boxed in the corner. As everyone knows, I really don't like to do gameplay stuff because it's really just not my area of expertise, but we've basically run out of things to do. So we have to do things that are gameplay oriented. And one of the things that we have to do for gameplay oriented stuff is we need to generate levels. Namely, like the level when you do a roguelike kind of a game, you have to have something that generates little sort of pieces that the player wants to play, right? In other words, little dungeon rooms where there's some set of things in it that has to happen. They have to kill a monster, they have to open a chest, whatever it is that they're going to do. We need to create like a bunch of those sorts of things, and those have to be sort of spread out in some kind of a logical way in this world that we generate. And we are at the point where we kind of need that to actually happen. We had some stuff in there that we played around with that was kind of just in there for this while we were working on other things like lighting and stuff like that. But we've never really gone and tried to make it so that we can really get some like gameplay things in there. And so now we need kind of like a real answer about how this part of the code base is going to work. And we need to have it generating some things that we, are going to claim are like gameplay things. And, yeah. Oh, you know what? Someone reminded me that I didn't put the overlay on. I should do that just to make sure that there's no... If I don't put the overlay on, sometimes I forget that you can't see what's in the bottom corner here where my head is, right? So it helps for me to just kind of like get that going. So let's put this on here. What I don't even know what time it is. It's 1:12. So let's say we start this at 1:15. Let's say, and then let's put a topic on it. Let's see, topic editor. Is going to be level generation. And let's say that it's a Handmade Hero stream. And now we'll have that little border behind our, have our little border behind our head. So the original way that we kind of sketched out this code that was for level generation... you can see in here we've got worldgen.cpp, and we kind of have a bunch of stuff that was happening in here. And the way that it was working to a first approximation is it was sort of like almost like a Verilog style approach. Like you would specify things in sort of a declarative sense. Like there's going to be these rooms. They're going to be connected to each other in this way. And then the thing would try to like place them, right? And you can continue to go down that route. It wasn't a bad idea that we had when we did that, but the problem with it, I think, is that if you actually want to go that route, then we need basically a rip up and replace router. Like we need a thing that like places things down, and then if it doesn't quite fit, it has to shift them around, right? And so the problem is we're going to end up creating a fairly complicated set of code in there, right? We would have to create a fairly intricate set of things to handle that kind of like how... I mean, you've seen people do this. There's lots of different ways that people do dungeon generation, right? And I just don't know that it's that sensible of an approach. The reason I don't know if it's that sensible approach is because it kind of feels a little bit too much like, an entity component system kind of a thing where people are sort of doing this like premature optimization of a way of doing things when you haven't actually ever determined what it is you're even trying to do. You know what I mean? Like, if you haven't actually gotten to the point yet where you're generating rooms that are fun and you've kind of like seen what kinds of layout techniques you want to do, it's kind of weird to have jumped right to a system where you're just expecting it to work declaratively, right? So that's mainly my problem with it, is I didn't like that approach. It felt a little bit like putting the cart too far before the horse kind of a thing. And so I think I'd like to try just like de-escalating that. Instead of using the rip up and replace style declarative sort of thing that we would then have to go implement and, have like a search and all that sorts of stuff, can we just do this in a sort of like top-down pass where we just create things using bespoke algorithms for placement and then only defer things if we absolutely have to? So, like, yes, there may be some things that we need to do deferred, but maybe just like we'll do those deferred things when we determine that they're actually necessary to do. Right? Because fundamentally speaking, this is a Zelda-style / Binding of Isaac-style game. And when you think about the dungeon layouts that occur in those sorts of games, they're not supposed to be super complicated. Oftentimes, they don't even really have many loops or cycles in them at all. They're very straightforward. They're like, Binding of Isaac in particular, I remember being very straightforward. Like, it's never a maze. It's a very, like, straightforward set of, like, 7 rooms with some side rooms occasionally just kind of just spammed in there. And so I think, like, for what we're going for, my feeling is it may be better for us to hand code how these things are placed using judicious sorts of like decision-making logic in the handwritten code, because we may be able to get things that feel more fun that way than if we have to figure out how to do like a search-based solver or something like that, which is much more complicated and harder to tune. Because, it can solve things like it can lay out loops better for you or things like that, maybe that are harder to do bespoke if you have kind of a general system that you dump things into. But it's also much harder to tune those general systems, like, because you have to figure out ways of expressing everything that you might want to say has to be expressed in the input to the layout system. And so, that's sort of how I feel about it. And so what I could imagine doing is, when we find we need something like that, like something that's going to solve a constraint thing where we need to do like a couple things together, like, can we just phrase that as its own little standalone task that we just call when we think we need something like that as like a pre-step and say, hey, find us an empty place to put a loop, and it'll do that and return to us just where those things are or something. And then we still use explicit placement to like drop them down after that or something, right? So basically all I'm saying here is like, can we like de-escalate this particular way the code was written into something more straightforward and procedural? And then, after we do that, if we do want things that are going to have to be a little fancier, can they remain isolated to basically utility functions that produce answers for the procedural thing to use, right? Without it all having to go through some giant mushy solver thing. Does that make sense? So that's kind of my feeling on it, and I guess we're going to proceed cautiously here because I don't really know how that's going to go, but in general, like, you can imagine something like this where we say create orphanage. What I want to do is sort of say, can we sort of change this into a more direct approach where instead of these calls, like this call gen room here, like all of these calls, these are basically all deferred declarative calls. They're not generating a room at that time. They're putting a room on a list of things to generate later. And so that's all we're talking about, right? All right. So the first thing I'd like to do is just try to get started on that, right? Try to unwind this a little bit. And you can see here that we've got this sort of system where we do a create world, and then at the end we do a place NPC call for each of these NPCs. And one of the things about that is this sort of thing could still be done completely procedurally in immediate mode, right? these place NPC calls, it's still pretty cheap for us to just have this list of places that NPCs can go and place them after the fact. So this sort of thing doesn't really concern me at all, to be completely honest with you, because this can still happen after the fact. It's this crap right here that I don't love so much, right? The fact that we do these two things as deferred, like create a bunch of room declarations that need to happen. And then later we just do this like, oh, and then by the way, go figure out how to make them all. So I'm just going to try to slowly unwind this. It's going to be kind of a slog to do that, but that's fine. And I don't mind this kind of coding. Maybe it's a little bit boring, but it's what you have to do from time to time as you observe systems and you want to kind of work them into different states. That's just... I like that kind of exploration. I like looking at a particular piece of code, saying, I don't like how this is structured. Let's try reorganizing it into a different way and see what we learn along the way. To me, that's what makes you a great programmer in the long run. If you keep doing that, I feel like I always get a little bit closer to being good at something, right? Every time I take a system and I try one thing and I learn from it, and I try another thing and I learn from it, I get a little better, right? And obviously, I'm not good enough yet at any particular one of these things that I'm saying I didn't like the way it came out, right? So there's, you're always shy of being great at something. There's not much you can do about that. But if you keep working on it, I feel like I keep getting better. And maybe there's an asymptote there, like where you're okay, I'm never going to be that great at this particular type of code. Oh well. But I feel like it is an asymptote you can keep working towards. And for me, that activity is satisfying. And I like that feeling that I'm learning something and exploring a new way of doing something, so that I don't feel like I'm just typing in rote stuff all the time. I'm like getting better, right? So anyway, when we come into the create call, we have this begin world gen bit here, and I don't know that that's necessarily a problem. If you look at how it goes, it does a bootstrap push on this world generator struct. And I think that's probably fine. I think we probably want to keep doing that. It's not really a problem. We really will. What we're probably going to do is just change what's in here, right? So instead of these things that are in here, we're probably going to get rid of like this stuff, like these options arrays or things like that. Well, primarily, mostly like the first apron, first room, first connection. So we're going to get rid of that stuff, but I don't know that we want to get rid of the world generator itself, because we probably do want some things like some temp stacks and some like placement information, and having the stuff in one place, like pointer to the world and what the dimensions of the tiles are, that sort of stuff. It seems like it makes sense that it lives there, so I would not pull that out. So we're going to keep that in here, and maybe these things just go away, but we're going to keep the overall structure there. What we're going to do, however, is early on here, we're probably going to say this stuff is not happening anymore, right? So we're not going to do this part. We'll have to figure out how we're going to do placement of the starting. So we'll have to do a thing where we do keep the location that we're going to start at. So we know that, right? And what we want to do here is say, okay, obviously at the outset, we're going to need to create a world, an idea of where everything is in the world. So, the world that we create, I would like to, let me show you. It's kind of a pointless endeavor, but, like I said, I'm not a game designer, so I feel like I need to talk this through just so you know what I'm doing. And furthermore, because, like I said, not a game designer, don't really know this stuff. So I'm just trying to give you a little insight into what I'm doing so that you can follow along. It's not educational. I can't tell you that any of this stuff is good. The programming is the programming, and I feel comfortable doing that, but the game design stuff I don't. So the original Legend of Zelda, if you take a look at how the map looks in something like this, so let me pull up like one of these randomly here. I'm kind of just clicking, however, but so if you can see kind of like how this map is set up, and maybe if I can get it into a, I don't want my head to cover the bottom part there, so maybe if I can just put it in a window, so that it's a little bit less confusing there. Can I zoom this in more? Yes, I can. Okay, so let's say we look at it there. Hopefully everyone can see that well enough. So if you take a look at how a map like this is arranged, you can see that the player starts kind of in the bottom center. And I think this is an important thing to think about when we're creating this because, and again, I know I always say I'm not a game designer, but I think it's important to remember because like if I was a game designer, I would have some opinions about these things and I would be trying to tell you to like do this or do that. And I'm not trying to say that at all. I'm just trying to give you what my very limited thought process is on how to do this because now I can't really write any code without explaining some game design idea behind it. And so the game design idea is probably dumb, but I want you to make sure that you understand what I was trying to do so you understand why I wrote the code the way I did. So when you look at this, there's a thing that they did here, and that is that the start is in the middle but bottom. And I don't know if this is intentional. Like, I don't know why Shigeru Miyamoto, I assume, would be the person who's making that decision. I don't know why they put it here. It's obviously not an accident. That's not 0, 0. Like 0, 0 is going to be like here or something, right? So they didn't start with the first map tile and say that's where the hero starts and we don't think about it from there. They put it in the middle, but at the bottom. Now, why is that important? Well, in terms of the way that the hero can explore the world, if you start in the bottom left, or let's just say one of the corners, then the exploration will all be going up and to the right. The player will quickly realize that they don't really need to check like leftward or downward. It limits how they're able to like the number of possible exploration choices, right? They're going to go in a very orderly fashion. That would be true from any corner, basically. And you can then create map things that force them to do more complicated patterns, but in general, the world will expand in that way, right? Now, putting the start in the bottom middle is sort of like a halfway between that and if we had put the start in the very middle, right? So if we'd put the start in the very middle, or I should say if they'd put the start in the very middle, then all directions would be open at once. There's any particular which way that the player might decide to go, right? So I'd just throw that out there as a first thing to think about, right? So we have to make a similar decision. When we place down the start, when we're going to basically, what we need to do is procedurally generate something that's sort of like this map, right? And we're going to have to place these different dungeons because we also have dungeons. We have an overworld that's like a forest, and we've got dungeons that are like actual little like, man-made things that you go into. And so we're going to have to place these dungeons, and we're going to have to place the start, and we're going to have to think about how that should feel to the player. How open should it feel at first? How do we want that experience to go, right? And so putting it in the bottom but center is like a half that. You could go in any direction but down, right? So it's a little bit like the center and a little bit like the corner. And I don't know if that was like I don't know how important that is to the fact that Zelda feels really good. If you play this game, it feels really good, right? You know what I'm saying? So I don't know what the impetus was behind that, but we have to make a similar decision. And I guess what I would say is for this particular game, I would like this game to have an exploratory feel. And I'd also like the game to have a fairly open feeling to it, where you can sort of choose to follow your own sort of volitional, like your own sort of volition about where you want to go. So my feeling about the start is I'm more inclined to place it in the center and then give the player some indication of what's in the various directions so that they can have a more choices at the outset. If they're another way to say this would be if you look at how games like Binding of Isaac are designed, they open up over time, right? So basically, like when you start, you have only a few things unlocked for like what constitutes a world, and so the world itself, when it's made, is very like small and simple. But as it goes, as you like play Binding of Isaac more, you unlock more and more things that go in the world, like types of rooms, boss monsters, different enemies, new items, or stuff like that, right? And then the world gets more expansive and more varied. So to me, it sort of feels like I think we want to take a slightly different approach to something like Zelda and say, I think we probably do want to start out kind of at the center of the world, sort of, right? Or at the very least, we would copy Zelda and say, start, maybe there's one direction, the band, that you don't explore, but the rest of the world goes off in all directions. Because that gives you more options than, say, putting you in a corner here and like where nobody puts baby in a corner, because it's going to be too constrictive, right? So I think we kind of probably want that feel. That would be my guess, right? So then furthermore, let's take a look at some of the other things that we want to think about in this case. So if we assume that we placed the start either sort of where Zelda placed it, and fictionally speaking, that might make some sense because this takes place at an orphanage on the edge of a forest. So if it's on the edge of a forest, you would expect like the orphanage to be here and this whole thing to be like the forest, and you would never go in the other direction because that's like back towards town or something, right? Like, so I do feel like this way that the Zelda map is set up is kind of not that dissimilar probably from what we would roughly want. Maybe it wouldn't be quite so rectangular, like maybe it would be a little bit more organically shaped, because we don't have any particular grid we have to follow for the overworld structure. It can be fairly organic looking. So maybe not a rectangle like Zelda, but something similar, right? Something similar in this, so you start kind of here. And so let's look at the other things. If you look at where the dungeons are placed, you can see that, for example, Dungeon 3, Dungeon 1, Dungeon 4 are all very close to the start. But Dungeon 4 requires, well, you can't see this. I don't know why I'm saying you can't see it. So it's kind of, I apologize for saying so. But, well, if you can imagine, there's a raft point here. The player actually can't get to Dungeon 4 until they unlock the raft. So even though this is apparently very close, it's actually much further because they're going to have to complete other things in the game before they can actually access it. So Dungeon 4 is not actually there, but it brings up a Metroidvania point, which is to say, if we are going to have dungeons in the game which you can only access using specific items you don't get until later, then you may want to place one or two of those close to the start so that the player can see that there is something that they do not have yet that they might want to get, right? That's sort of the Metroidvania thing. Zelda's doing it right here, and I feel like this is probably... Is this before Metroid? Same year? Is that the same year? August 6th, 1986. When was Zelda? How do I get, like, original? The original. Same year. So, but Zelda's first, right? February 21st. Metroid is August 6th. So yeah, it's called a Metroidvania thing, kind of categorized there, but I mean, Zelda did it first before Metroid anyway. So let's call it a Zelda thing, right? So, you know, that's something we might consider, but it's a separate, so that's sort of a second tier thing. Like, that's like, okay, if we end up with things where we're going to gate access to an area based on something that you have to retrieve, which I don't know if we do. Isaac, for example, Binding of Isaac does not do that. Legend of Zelda does. So but we would cross this off in terms of talking about accessible dungeons, right? So Dungeon 3 is accessible and Dungeon 1 is accessible. They're both quite close. If you look at how easy it is to get to Dungeon 1, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves, right, from the start. And you can get there 2 different ways, really. Whereas if you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 moves to get to Dungeon 3, it's still quite close. The difference, I believe, is the monsters over here are a little bit harder than the monsters in here. So there is some signaling to you that maybe this dungeon comes before this dungeon in terms of difficulty, but I don't think there's any real reason you can't do Dungeon 3 first. I think some people do. I think I may have. Dungeon 2 is quite a bit further away, right? You have to go all the way out through here up into there, right? Although, wait, how do you access Dungeon 2, though? I don't remember. Because you can see it's not, is it? Gosh, it's been so long since I played Zelda. How do you access this one? Do you climb up this, like, is that a waterfall? What is that thing? Anyone remember? You must have some Zelda players. Stairs. Okay, so you can get up there just walking up. So that one's quite far. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 is probably the closest way you're going to go, right? But 1, 2, and 3 are about the only ones I think that are going to be straightforward. Everything else is quite far, right? I mean, some of these dungeons are really far away. Some of them are hidden. So I want to say Dungeon 8 and Dungeon 7, you can't even see. They don't actually exist. You have to use an item to find them at all. So Dungeon 7 requires, I think, playing a flute. Right? Is that correct? Is it Dungeon 7 that requires playing the flute? Or whistle, rather? And then Dungeon 8 requires using the lamp. Is that right? I like getting confirmation from the stream. I feel like there's probably other Zelda people on here. I know Zelda pretty well, but not as it's been a while. But I believe those are the correct dungeons. I believe 8 is the one that requires a lamp. The lamp, you have to burn a tree with the lamp. And then I think Dungeon 7 is the one that you have to play the whistle, and it whisks you away to it. It's basically like a little, like, you play the whistle, and this little, like, almost like a tornado comes. And I think it brings you here. So this actually isn't the dungeon. It's just where you blow the whistle, and you, like, end up, it brings you here, I think. Right? It goes like, and it comes, and it goes, I think that's what happens. I think. It drains the water. It does? Does it drain the water? I don't remember that. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I don't remember that. Anyway, none of that really matters. I just wanted to kind of give you just a sort of feel for what is actually going on here. We want to do something similar to this thought process where we put, you know, dungeons that are going to be very difficult. You know what? Let's just answer the question for us. So what is it? Dungeon Dungeon 7? Zelda Dungeon 7. Does it have like an opening at the very beginning of it?
If you're
You know? What? What is happening? Can that go back in here? Oh, the internet. It doesn't look like... Let's see if we do Zelda Dungeon Whistle. He's not going to play it. Zelda Play Whistle. Ugh. We're never going to find this. Is there like a time? Is there any like in the summary maybe? Like a time? No. Just hoping I randomly stumble across it, which is probably not going to happen, let's be honest. Did he go down the... That's probably too far. This is probably going to be... Where is it? This is where those little time stampers would be helpful, right? It's like a little pond that you walk into and you play the whistle. There it is. Is that it? I think that's him playing the whistle. Nope, you were right. It does drain the water. All right. So then I don't know what I was talking about with the wind thing. There's an invisible wall to get to the upper right corner of the map. Okay. Link to the past has the wind thing in front of a bird statue. Okay. I'm getting my Zeldas mixed up. All right. Anyway, that stuff for a later date, obviously, like basically gated access based on items is a game design decision. I'm not sure how I feel about it. It's kind of a little annoying, I think. Sometimes I do think that it has merit. It's like, you know, if it's like I can't cross water for the entire game and then I get like a sea turtle or whatever that lets me cross water or whatever the standard kind of thing is, you know, sometimes that can be a really nice experience. Like it's kind of cool to like be enabled to like go to these places. But I feel like it's sort of it's just a glorified key, you know? And I don't really love that kind of game design where it's just like, well, now you have to do... I'm just forcing you to do these two things in this order. I'm not giving you like a tool that maybe makes it easier to do this section if you have the tool. So maybe it's easier if you decide to do it in this order or something like that. I'm literally telling you like you can't do Dungeon X before you do Dungeon Y because we made the thing, right? So putting that aside, let's pretend we're not going to do that right now, or if we're going to do that, we're going to do it very sparingly. So mainly what we're talking about is when we want to come up with a design here where I do think we want to place harder dungeons further away than easier dungeons, probably. Or our other option is just to place all the dungeons. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know. Like, it feels like you need some kind of a progression like that, right? Like, it feels like you want to have, I mean, that's how Binding of Isaac works as well. Like, the top floors are easier than the bottom floors, and you work your way through them, right? So it kind of feels like you want something like that. At the same time, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I don't know, like, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm just going to say, like, let's do the following. Because I feel like game design wise, I just don't have enough knowledge for this sort of thing. So I'm going to say the following. Let's just make a system that will. So what it'll do, it's not a system, it's just a little piece of code. We'll make a piece of code, more or less a blue noise generator like we do, where you just kind of drop down random points, and if they're too close to existing points, we pull them and retry, right? Just really but simple, quick, sort of blue noisy sort of thing. And we'll just have it so that it's easy for us to like set some floating point numbers ahead of time to tune how these dungeons are dropped. And we'll just play with it a little bit over time and see what we get. So we'll make something that basically says, all right, you're going to start in like the bottom center, right? And we're going to then place these dungeons kind of around you in like a very sort of arc, in a randomized arc, but where we guarantee that no two dungeons are too close together, because we kind of want there to be a little bit of separation between them so they can have different like aprons around them and stuff. And that'll just be how we do this, right? That feels right to me. I mean, I don't know. That's just, I think that's what I'm going with. And so let's do that. And then over time, we can try to figure out what we want to do about that sort of like difficulty progression, or what that actually even means, because I don't really know what that should look like. You know, what I do know is there's going to be something here, like a dungeon count, right, that we generate. And, you know, we kind of have like a random choice sort of thing happening, where we've got like this bit. We can sort of say, all right, let's say there's going to be a random choice. Oh, you know what? It's probably a random between, right? Do we have random between for ints? Yeah. Probably going to be more like a random between. And so we're going to pick some number of dungeons, and maybe that number of dungeons comes... Oh, gosh. John is rating us. Don't let him see anything that we just said. Don't tell him what we were doing, because he will probably be horrified by the low quality of what I have just said for 15 minutes. Tell him that I was like that I said a lot of really intelligent things about game design, and not at all that it was all very stupid and probably wrong. Don't mention that. Anyway, yeah, no, in all fairness, like, yeah, we were basically just trying to figure out what we want to do for dungeon placement, and it was kind of just like, I don't know, because I'm too dumb. So anyway, we're in the dungeon count phase, and we're doing, so this will probably just be something where we want to do a random between, and my assumption is that if we do want a sort of expansion that occurs there, this dungeon count is going to have to be something that kind of varies a bit, right? And so we can just assume that this is going to be a random between. And for now, we could just say, like, okay, let's just say we're going to put it at 6 for now because we're not actually going to do the random between. So this is just a placeholder for that. And I believe we already have the world generator is typically going to use a random series from somewhere. It's got the entropy here. Yeah. And so we're just going to ask it to generate some number of dungeons. And then what I want to do is I do want to place the dungeons in sort of at least blue noise arc fashion so that we can ensure that, like, what I'm going to want to do is make sure that the dungeon entrance area is not too constricted, because there's going to be a little bit of a like entryway to the dungeons. We don't want them too close together. We want them to feel like they're separated by a little bit, and also they need room to sort of have their entry area so they're not like smushed together and they both, like, you know, occupy the same screen or something. That would be very bad, right? So we want to have something that keeps those apart. So I'm going to have a thing here where we basically have to do a loop placing these dungeons. And maybe this is even just a while loop while, like, placed dungeon count, while the placed dungeon count is less than the dungeon count, right? So we're going to do a while loop. We're going to try and place one of these dungeons, and we can use probably just our basic math to do this. And what we can do is say, well, we have a certain distance, again, that we're going to want to think about here. And again, this is kind of a tough thing. When I'm writing this, I'm just going to say, like, look, we're going to have to play with it. I don't know ahead of time, right? It's a game design thing, and I just don't know. So I couldn't tell you. But basically, when we do our random generation, the goal here will be to take the world tuning parameters, like how far away the dungeons are and how many they are, and we want to constrain the random generation enough that it feels good to play. But in these kinds of games, my experience with them is they're not really supposed to be consistent, though. In other words, you're not really supposed to have a consistent gameplay feel when you boot up something like Binding of Isaac. Some runs are supposed to go terrible, and some runs are supposed to go great. And some of that is your play, and some of that is the RNG. Like, you're supposed to occasionally get some really good weapons all together, right? Or, like, you get a really good build for your Isaac, and it's your game to lose, right? Whereas other times you get an incredibly crappy build for Isaac, and it's your game to win, right? If you actually win those games, it feels better. So I feel like part of the roguelike experience is that your skill is obviously critical. You can't win if you suck. But also that the random number generation is not supposed to be tuned to provide the same challenge level every time. The challenge level is supposed to kind of float. So that's why normally I would say in this kind of loop, if we were trying to make the challenge level be very consistent over time, we would want to craft this loop very carefully. But actually, I think I'm going to let it be more haphazard at first, because part of the whole point of these games is that sometimes those random numbers collide, and they're supposed to. They're supposed to produce a uniquely bad or a uniquely good run every so often when the randomness puts all of the dungeons right next to each other for a great speed run or something like that. That's supposed to happen occasionally. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Oh my gosh, look who's here. It's a Rocket Bee! How you doing, Rocket? Can you say hi? Can you say hi to everybody? Okay. You can't get in the way too much, though, all right? Don't get in the way too much. You got to behave yourself. Can you behave yourself? That's my wrist rest that you knocked over. It's not that helpful, sweetie. I got news for you. It's not that helpful what you're doing right now. Okay. Okay. Maybe you could not do that. Maybe you could not take down the lights as well. The other night you knocked over the KVM switch. That was interesting. I'm not sure how I'm going to secure that thing in the future. All right, Rocket, come on. Come on, big bean. Why don't you go play in the moving blankets? There you go. All right. So yeah. Mr. 427, I totally agree with that, by the way. I would like there to be a lot of contextual clues that tell you where are difficult and where are easier areas. The problem that I have, and so one thing that I'm kind of like a little confused about, and like I feel like this is just a case of like thinking it through a little bit harder. Like maybe as we do it, we'll get some ideas. But one of the things that it's a little tough to think through for this design is there a reason why you would go, like, suppose you have dungeons that are easier and harder. If they're literally just easier or harder, then if you can choose the order in which you go to them, why would you ever do anything other than whatever the order is that makes the most sense for your skill level? Like, if you don't need to go to the easy dungeons because you can skip them because you're that good and you don't need the extra weapons you'll get there or something to start, then you just skip them. There's no point to going there. I don't know. It feels a little odd. So like, I'm wondering if maybe what you would rather do, if you can, is make it so that the dungeons aren't really about difficulty so much as they're more like, you know, they're more like just different types of monsters and sort of tile layouts. And they all get the same hardness, sort of roughly. So the upper floors are easier, the lower floors are harder. And, you know, you can choose to go back to the orphanage. Maybe we have the ability to, like, warp back to the orphanage at various points, right? And so really more what you're choosing is just how far down to go in any particular dungeon. I'm thinking more of something like a Ancient Domains of Mystery or the heck's that other, like, is it Ancient Domains of Mystery or is it, what's the other one besides NetHack? There's like NetHack and Ongbound. Thank you. That's what I'm thinking of. Ongband or Angband. I don't know how you pronounce that one. I'm thinking of Angband. So in Angband, you like go down into the dungeon some number of floors, and then you come back up, right? And if the coming back up was annoying, we could get rid of it. So we could have it so that you can, every like end of each floor, there's a warp back to the entrance, right? So that's pretty easy to fix. And so maybe like that kind of sounds more plausible to me as something that would be enjoyable, where, so basically like the dungeons are not like harder or not. All the dungeons are the same difficulty in some sense. They all start out easy on the top floor and get harder as they go, and you're kind of like choosing how far to push on each dungeon as you go. That feels to me like, if I was a game designer who knew what the heck they were doing, it feels like that is like a more intelligent choice that doesn't create like arbitrary situations for the player that are just kind of dumb. Whereas if the dungeons are by difficulty, then what's the point? Like, either you need to do them all in order because the difficulty of each dungeon is enough harder that you need the stuff from the prior dungeons to do it, or it's not, in which case, why do you even do the previous dungeons as an expert player? Maybe the argument is you do them as a beginner player, but that just kind of, So I really do feel like maybe let's just, so forget that. So that's not what it is. Difficulty is by floor, not by dungeon. All dungeons are similarly structured. Maybe some are sort of harder than others just by random chance, right? But in general, the difficulty doesn't go up by dungeon, it goes up by floor. I think I like that. I could make it so that completing dungeons makes future dungeons harder, but I don't really want that because I want you to have some freedom to choose. And if your choice doesn't really matter what you chose to do because we're just going to make something else harder, it feels like it takes a little bit away from the agency of the player sniffing out what they might want to do and choosing a certain path, you know? I don't think intro floors will become grading by the end of the game because I feel like probably you can go down the intro floors much quicker. So you're not really skipping the whole dungeon, but you just wouldn't necessarily take the time to, like, you know what I mean? Like, I could see that being much less onerous than, like, oh, I just skipped 3 whole dungeons because why not, right? I don't know. It could be not the case. Like, that could be very, very much not the case. This could just be stupid, but I think I'm going to go with that for now. So we're going to create a random between here and you know, I don't know, maybe I will throw in some random stuff there. And then what I want to do is I want to create a distance that's going to, oh, John has said something. Please let me consider it for a moment. If intro floors are too long, they would be boring, but you want people to have a chance to feel like they actually got more powerful rather than just ramping difficulty up to meet them all the time. Yeah, and in theory, your upper floors would be smaller, right? Because they're supposed to be beginner, so they're supposed to be easier. I mean, I guess you could spam a bunch of, like, rooms, but with a bunch of health so that they're big but easy, but that seems less good anyway. So... yeah, I think there is potential difference for gameplay based on items and weapons, yeah. But again, I don't know. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. I just want to get this basic placement down and start there. And I think this is a pretty reasonable way to do it. Like, I think, like, I'm comfortable enough with what I just said that I'm fairly sure I can, like, feel it out from there. Like, it's like, okay, it's probably what I said isn't perfect, but it's like, it sounds closer to something that will work than each dungeon is ascending difficulty, which to me just kind of just sounds crappy, right? So I'd rather start with something that I, like, kind of feel like I feel confident in, like, starting there. I don't know if we'll end up at lower. The other one just kind of sounded bad, so I was like, didn't really want to do it. So anyway. So I think we really just want something extremely simple here, like this sort of a thing, where we're going to create some number of dungeons. We randomly pick how many there are, and this, I don't know how parameterized we actually want this to be at the end of the day, but again, we're just kind of starting simply here. We're going to go through the dungeons here and generate the actual dungeons, right? So we're going to have, like... something where we do a create dungeon here. And so this is what I mean by just doing simplified pre-passes where we're not trying to, overcomplicate anything. So we basically do one little point generator here that'll generate some points, and it will just, like, make sure that they're spread out well enough, and then we'll go through and create the dungeons for them, and then we'll do, like, a create forest, right? And we need create orphanage as well. Right? So we're going to have something that's sort of like this. We place down the points so we know where in the world the dungeons are going to go first. We then create the dungeon, so we have basically the outer world part of the dungeon and the floors that go down, which are basically going to be completely separate. Like, we'll make sure that dungeons are far enough apart that they don't kind of like, mush into each other accidentally. And then we'll create the forest to fill in basically the parts all around that. And then we'll create the orphanage finally at the end of it. That's it, right? I have a not really a story about the awesome button, but someone was mentioning the awesome button. But a story about the $1 million button. So there was a game. I want to say it was in development. It was, I want to say, Gabriel Knight 3 from Sierra, which doesn't exist anymore. But basically, they were making a point-and-click adventure game, Sierra game, and it was going to be 3D. So the game was, it was three-dimensional, and they were like halfway through the development of this game. And basically, it's like, it's the standard Sierra point-and-click adventure, but it's like, it's 3D assets, because that's like what the game is at that time, is 3D assets, right? So instead of the old 2D painted stuff, it's like 3D rendered or something like this. I'm probably getting some of the details here wrong, and I apologize. But apparently, like literally halfway through the development, the project, like the person who's heading this project says, like, I think we should add a thing so that you can view the scenes from any angle. So there's like a button you can press and you can like rotate the scenes around or whatever, right? And like it was the class, and they said that's what we're doing. And so then they had to go and do vastly all this additional work to generate all these extra things, because all of the assets had just been designed assuming that the player could only ever look from just the one angle or two angles if there was a different part of the shot, right? It was a fixed camera game. And so all of a sudden they had to do everything complete, like, to allow all of this free motion. And so like the devs at the time called it the $1 million button, because it cost dramatically more, and the project ended up costing dramatically more because somebody had this stupid idea to add this thing that nobody cares about, this button, right? And of course, it's kind of amusingly anachronistic today, because the notion that a $1 million button is somehow expensive, when today, like, $1 million is like such a laughable amount of money for these larger projects. Hundreds of millions of dollars are now the standard. So, $1 million button sounds like a cheap button. $1 million button is probably something that like one player paid for in Star Citizen, right? So $1 million button, $1 million is like the cost of one ship in Star Citizen, right? So it's a bit anachronistic, but anyway, that was a story that was told to me by employees who were there at the time, and they all called it the $1 million button. I think I got the game right. I think it was Gabriel Knight 3, but I could have there were so many of those Sierra games. There were all like 12 installments in every franchise. I could have the wrong one, so I apologize if I got the game wrong. Anyway, so yeah, in here what I'm going to have to do is I want to have positions for these dungeons. So, I don't know, that might be something that we want to keep around long term, because if there's going to be a thing like, I guess I don't need a max dungeon count, because this has like a temp memory thing, so I guess I can just do whatever I want here if I want. But I'm going to do a V2, which is like dungeon locations or something like that. And I'm not really sure what I'm doing here, but something like that. And we'll just use the temp memory to, we'll just use the temp memory here to get ourselves an array of however many of these there are. So when we do the dungeon count, we'll just say, okay, we want dungeon count number of V2s, and is that gen? There we go. And then we'll go ahead and push those on. So when we generate these, we'll push those on. So we'll do something like, dungeon locations, placed dungeon count ++ equals dungeon P, right? And so what we need to do here is actually generate these and check, right? We want to basically pick a random point in the world that we think is a reasonable place to place this dungeon. But then we want to make sure that it's not too close to some other dungeon. And I don't really know how we want these things placed. Like I kind of said before, I assume that the sort of the way like this Zelda map works is sort of how we want this like band. Like we kind of want, dungeons just placed kind of like about a similar distance in like a band, so that the player kind of roughly knows they explore outwards and there's kind of dungeons scattered around the ring. So, no matter where they're exploring, they're going to hit something. There's not like tons of dead space and no idea where the heck anything is. I don't suspect that I've thought of all the things I should think of there, but like, to start with, so just like a band of distance. So I'm thinking like min dungeon distance kind of thing. And max dungeon distance. So I would want to say, the game is roughly meters. So, how far away should these things be? You want them to be 4 or 5 screens probably away. Sort of, something like that. Let's say... I don't really know. So if it's like 4 or 5, if the dungeons are 4 or 5 screens away, that's maybe what, like 40 meters? Well, no, because I guess they're maybe like 7 high and like, or 9 high and 17 across, something like that. So if they're like 9 high, that'd be like more like 9 meters, right? So it'd be more like 9 times 5, which is 45 if it was 5 screens away. So I don't know. Let's say it's something like 40 meters at a minimum and, maybe twice that distance at a maximum. And so we want to do randoms between the min dungeon distance and the max dungeon distance, where we say like, okay, what's the dungeon distance? This is how far we're going to go. And then we want sort of like an arm point, right? And the other way I could do it is just generate points and check these distances instead of using an arm. And I don't know... That's probably like a little more flexible, but takes more iterations. So I don't know. That's kind of a hard one. Maybe I will do it that way. Gosh. Maybe I will do it that way for now. So I apologize. I think I might not do it that way. So I think what I'll do is I'll do a random between for the vector. I don't know if we have a random vector, random v2 kind of stuff. It doesn't look like we really do. So yeah, I'm going to say like, all right, we've got the random between, so I'm just going to do 2 of those. So I'm going to do... Or really just like dungeon P. And I'm going to ask for 2 random betweens. And I'm going to generate the position for the X and the Y. Like so, and then I'm going to take the distance between this and the start. So we're going to have like a start P, like an orphanage position. And I don't know what this is going to be. I guess it could just be 0, 0. I don't really know if we care about that particularly much. You know, my guess would be that we can put the orphanage wherever the heck we want. We didn't really choose our coordinate systems with any particular thing in mind, so, 0, 0 is as good a place as any, but we could put it anywhere. So then the dungeon P would basically just have to do randomization between a range, and, I don't know exactly what the range would be, but let's say we're going from -100 to 100 on X because it's a spread, but for Y, we are only going to start at the orphanage Y location and then go to something well in advance of the orphanage Y location. So again, we're basically creating something that sort of looks like this. We're randomly picking points in here, but then we're going to classify those points as like acceptable or unacceptable based on certain criteria that we feel like are manageable game design wise. So for starters, I would take the distance and say that the dungeon distance, in this case, is the distance between, and I could just do length squared, for example. Maybe I'll do dungeon distance squared. The length between the orphanage and the dungeon P tells me how far away they are. And then I can do basically a check, like in distance band, right? I can say if the dungeon distance squared is greater than or equal to the min dungeon distance, let's see if we can get that formatted a little bit more nicely there. And it's less than or equal to the maximum dungeon distance, then at that point we know that we're in the sweet spot that we defined has to kind of be, right? Like, we said everything has to be in this band for it to be like a reasonable gameplay distance apart. So that's whether it's in the distance band that we've chosen. It has to be between those two things. And then the other thing I want to do is it has to be like not too close, right, to other dungeon. And we're going to assume that it's not too close to another dungeon at the start. And then we're going to do a test of those two things. If it's in the distance band and it's not too close to another dungeon, then that is a legal dungeon location. So we can add more predicates to this. There's a bit of a cost to it. It's going to sit here and spin trying random choices until it can find it, which is not always the best way to do things. But for now, I'm going to stick with it because it allows us to just pile predicates on there and see how they go, right? And so, yeah, we could think about doing that more efficiently in the future if we really need to for some reason. So what I need to do now is actually compute this value here, not too close to other dungeon. So in order to do that, I need to run through all the other dungeons that we already placed. So there's basically a test dungeon index that's going to run from 0 to the current one that we're trying to place, right? So basically all the previous ones, let's see what the distance is to those. And we'll call this the dungeon separation distance. And the dungeon separation distance probably has to be something like, I mean, now that I think about it, we kind of have this problem of like, if the dungeons aren't far enough away from the center, it may be hard to find ones that are far enough separated to pass the secondary distance check. But hey, we can tune these numbers when we get to it, right? I got tired of saying distance squared all the time and discovered that it's called a quadrant. Really? Is that really true? Is there an actual math term for the squared distance? If that's true, that is, I totally agree with you. It'd be great. Yeah, this is definitely today I learned. The main idea of divine proportions is to replace distances by the squared Euclidean distance, renamed in this book as quadrants. And to replace angles by the squares of their sines, renamed the book as spread and thought of as a measure of separation between two lines. Divine proportions defines both these concepts directly from the Cartesian coordinates. Is it only in this book, though? Like, is this a new term or is this an ancient term that people have always used? So yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. Sorry, I'm not sure I can quite get on board yet, only because it may be a little bit too niche. I'll check with like the heavy hitters. If Dimitri Spanos, for example, says that quadrants is a reasonable term to use, then maybe we'll use it. But like, I wouldn't want to. I don't really do highfalutin math, so I'd rather not adopt a term if I'm not really sure that it's appropriate. I don't, I'll do that in programming because I feel like I have the programming chops to support deciding how I think things should be named. I don't have the math chops. I'm not a total math beginner, but I'm just not very good, and so I don't want to go around pretending I should know how things are named, right? I'd rather follow some people I trust's opinion on the math names and trust that they do what I do for programming, and and if I were to learn enough math and get good enough at it, that I would agree with them. I mean, can never know that for sure, but I'd rather at least defer to somebody who I have reason to believe knows what they're doing. So okay, Google Ngram search has not heard of it. So this is just a new term from some guy's book or whatever. So I'm not going with quadrants yet. Sorry, guys. I'm not doing it. I'm going to still say squared distance for now, just for the avoidance of confusion, and we'll keep going. So the dungeon separation distance, I don't know what this could be exactly. This the distance between any two dungeons has to be at least this much. I think I would like it to be at least 20, but I don't actually know if this supports that. These distances may have to increase in order for that to be true. So although inside the same band here, that would be true just between two from the min to the max, that would be enough. So maybe that is fine, and maybe we can't have it be 20 or even maybe more than 20. So this is the min dungeon separation distance, and we just want to test this here. It's exactly the same thing as we were doing before. This is a separation squared, right? So the separation squared is just going to be the dungeon position, and we've got this list of dungeon positions here. And we're just going to pull out this one, the one that we're testing, and we look at the length squared. If the length squared here is less than the minimum dungeon separation distance that we require, oops, we don't have to square that. Oh, yes, we do. Never mind. If it's less than the distance that we require, then we are going to set not too close to other dungeon to false. And by the way, we can break out of the loop because we don't need to test anymore. Not that that really matters, but we can. Okay. So, I don't know why there's an extra close parentheses there. No one does. That is just a typo. That was kind of harder to see than it should have been. So this loop I maintain will basically get us an angular spread sort of. It'll like produce like basically an analyst while we're talking about math terms. This will produce an analyst, and really it's like a it's like half an analyst. It'll produce the top half of that, right? All of the dungeons will fall in one, like the top half of an analyst, right? So that's, I think, most of what we would do for placing dungeons. I don't know. Probably we're going to want it to have more criteria than that at some point. But for right now, that should be fine. And so what we need now is to loop through the dungeons as we go and actually place each dungeon somewhere. Now, one of the problems that we're going to have here is we don't have a lot of ways to visualize any of this stuff. We may need to make a quick thing that shows, and I think we did... I think we had something like this where we would draw all of the rooms. And we probably have to bring something like that back because basically we only see like a really small area around the player when you're playing. And so as we're doing like tuning of these dungeon generation things, we probably want to have some way of visualizing their superstructure really quickly. And like I don't have that at the moment. So I don't want to have to like hop the character all the way around. So probably we're going to need to figure out some way to make this actually do something more sensible here so that we can visualize it. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. All right. So this crap, this, right? This is the thing I'm talking about. So maybe what we have to do there. Excuse me. Very allergy right now. So this thing is, I think, just kind of temporary. I don't think anyone uses it anymore. And I think it was just kind of there for this purpose. We'll probably use this again for debugging, where we create like these world rooms and draw them so that we can see what the generator did without having to actually go to everywhere. Because when we're doing that top level generation, it would just suck to have to walk all the way around this giant world we might be creating that's supposed to take like 2 hours to play through for one given run or something like that. It's never going to happen. Like, we're not going to hop through the whole thing every time as we debug the generation process. So we're going to need something faster, right? So I think that's what we're going to do there. And I assume there's an add room in here somewhere. Add world room, right? So maybe what we do is just spam a bunch of this crap. And I'm assuming this is just not even in the thing anymore. So let's just check. Right, so here is the only way that this is happening at all, right? Is it just gets added there, and I think it's just for mapping. So yeah, like basically what we should be able to do is have a thing that draws the rooms, and I assume that's in world mode. There's probably something already that does that. Yes. So this is probably what we need. And I don't think we need the world transform anymore. We stopped. I think that's automatic now. So I think you can just do that. So, yeah. That saves us the trouble. So that's great. And so I think we can just use that. Okay. So what we're going to do in the world generator then to get started is, rather than actually generating anything, which we're not going to do, and we don't actually know how to do the create forest, create orphanage part of things yet either. In fact, I might make these different things so I can see what they are. There's no particular reason they have to be like this, but I'm going to go ahead and pull them out here. Create dungeons. I'm just going to make a thing which will create the dungeons using a world generator that's passed in, and then a thing that creates the forests, and this won't do anything, and then creates your orphanage, and this will have to do something so that our character has some place to stand, or I think the game might assert at startup, because it's like, I can't actually start the game. There's no actual geometry in the game anywhere, so that might be a problem. So we have to create a little dummy room. But for now, when we do these create dungeons like so, what we'll do instead of actually creating a dungeon is we'll just create a world room that we can look at. And so that way we can get started fairly quickly looking at whether our generator is placing things in places that make any sense at all. And we'll go from there. Now, generating the orphanage maybe wants to happen first, since we presumably want it to be like the base location. So maybe we'll call this orphanage location here. And when we generate the orphanage, maybe that orphanage P actually now in here where it does the test for the band location, it'll actually do that using the orphanage location that it gets. Fenedge location. It'll use that, getting it from the gen itself instead. And I guess I can leave it as orphanage P since we use it in various places. I'll just do orphanage P, and it pulls it out of the gen to start with. So dungeon count will now have to be something that is put in this struct so that we have it, so we know how many there are, like so. And in here, we'll loop over the dungeon count, something like that, and then create dungeon. All looks about right. Create orphanage, undeclared. It's right there. Oh, redefinitions. Sorry. Let's go ahead and mush all of this crap into here. So here's our old call that creates the orphanage. Here we're going to not do any of this. So it's going to remain basically a giant if0 block for now. And then we will try to create the procedural version of this rather than the declarative version of it as probably one of the first things we do, since we know exactly what it looks like, right? Okay. I don't think there's anything more to it than that. I think that's about it. All right. So let's try to get that running in a way that I guess will create one dummy room so that we can place the hero somewhere so that the game is happy and running. But then mostly what we'll focus on temporarily is just the debug map that we'll draw, and we'll see whether we can get some randomly generated layouts that look like we believe they could be fun. Right? Like, that's it. Oh, the stretching, the infinite stretch. There's a game called, like, Sausage Dogs Extend to Infinity or something like that. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? It's something like Sausage Dogs Extend to Infinity. I don't remember the name. Sausage Dog Tends to Infinity is the game. Sorry. Sausage Dog Tends to Infinity. Which is kind of like the supermarket generic version of Steven's Sausage Roll or something. I don't know. It came out at like after Steven's Sausage Roll, and oh, I guess I'm thinking of something else. It's not out? I thought this game was out like several years ago. Never mind. I guess I'm super confused. But like it's weird because it's like it's called Sausage, but not Steven's Sausage Roll, but Sausage Dog. I don't know. I didn't quite get why there was a game with such a close name that looks almost the same as well. It was very confusing. So I don't quite get it, but I don't know. Could be a great game. I haven't ever played it. I thought it was already out. Clearly I'm wrong about that. So never mind. Anyway, Sausage Dog tends to infinity is when I go like this and stretch, I feel like I'm tending to infinity. So I don't know. I'm so confused because I thought this game had been out for a while. I just had no idea. I thought it was like sort of a like Steven's Sausage Roll, like I said, like a kind of like knock on Steven's Sausage Roll or something, but apparently has been in development much longer because I thought it came out like a year after Steven's Sausage Roll or something. That was not true. So I take back everything I said. I obviously was very misinformed about that particular game, and it's still in development. So never mind. Okay. So what we need to do here, like I said, is first I want to do an add world room call. So this thing. I want to do this call for every dungeon and for the orphanage so that I can have some understanding of where the heck they are, right? So I want to add one of these rooms with a min pose and a max pose. I don't really remember much about how we create world positions in this game. So that's a little confusing. But, you know, that's all right. Let me see here what we've got. This is my thinking sound. It's an engine-like sound. So I'm not sure how we're supposed to create these world positions from scratch. And I can understand why we don't normally, because precision-wise you don't want to do that. But in this case, we don't really care about precision because we're just placing random points in the world that don't need to have any animation or smoothness. They can be very discrete. So that really shouldn't be much of a problem. you would just want it to canonicalize them. So I guess the answer is we just say that these are going to be like canonicalized, I guess. I mean, I think it's just going to be this call with a base position. So I think it's just this, right? So I think we would do this with a min and a max, right? And all of this stuff kind of has to be more or less deleted. I mean, a lot of it does because we got rid of Z. So all of our code here handles complete three-dimensional worlds, but we don't actually need it to do that. So that's a bit of an issue. Right. I mean, there's no point in all of that stuff. It doesn't need to be there for any reason at all. And so at some point we should probably just yank it. We don't need to do that now. It's just like, hey, just like people create a 2D game in Unity, but Unity's 3D. We're creating a 2D game in Handmade Hero Engine, and Handmade Hero happens to be 3D. We just don't need it. We don't need it to be. But anyway, so when we do map truncate the world space, then we basically just pass it some base thing, which in this case is just nothing, right? There's no base. And the dungeon position that whatever that's going to be, like the dungeon P here, we would just say, well, it's going to be like the V3 of that. Can I do that in this? Do I have to say 2v3? Do I have to give it a parameter? Yeah. So if I say we're going to take the dungeon position and we're just going to, spread it out by some radius in either way, then this is the way that we would create such a marker, right? Now, because I'm going to want to do this, I'm going to call this I'm going to make this an actual function that I can call anywhere I want. It's just like place debug marker, and you just pass it the 2D coordinate, and it'll do this garbage for you. Since, it's just like a debug function, and I don't want to have to think about it every time. I want it to be easy to call and for it to do the right thing automatically. So we've got a radius. The radius is going to be, I don't know, something like, 5 meters, let's say. And maybe we do it sort of asymmetric, so maybe it's more like 7 or 8 meters by 5 meters by, 1 meter, something like that. And then we're going to remember these world locations as the min p and max p for this debug marker and pass them to the thing that adds those little room slots in there. The dungeon will then just say place debug marker with that, with that dungeon. Now, when we do create dungeon here, we're going to pass the dungeon index in so we know which one we're talking about because there's multiple dungeons, right? And so in order to get the dungeon P that we would place the debug marker, we're going to pull that out of the generator's dungeon location array, which remembered where all the dungeons were, which is something I think we're going to want to refer to more than once. And so we're just going to place that debug marker, and that's all we're going to do. We'll do the same thing for the orphanage we'll just do it at 0, 0. And I think that's it. That should create debug stuff that we can observe. Nothing gets created for the forest right now, but that's because the forest is like fills in around it. And so I don't know that I care. There's nothing to draw there yet until we have some more like subtle, interesting thing to say about that, right? Bobby McFerrin, people we're mentioning Bobby McFerrin because I started with the stream with elevator music, mouth elevator music. I don't remember how it went, but it was like that kind of thing. Just like elevator music kind of stuff. And someone was saying Bobby McFerrin, and then I guess the was also considered sort of Bobby McFerrin. So I guess I got kind of Bobby McFerrin. I became Bobby McFerrin adjacent across, during the course of the stream. One thing I would say is I fundamentally do not understand the appeal of Bobby McFerrin. It seems like such incredibly Emperor has no clothes sort of thing. Like, it's like the whole world got sold on like the most ridiculous concept for a song, which is just a guy going like boom, 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 boom. It's just like that's like some crap you do when you're screwing around with your friends in the car. That's not like, you don't buy that album, right? Like, who actually goes out and purchases an album of somebody doing that? It is so weird, right? It is so weird. It takes like the concept of low production values to a shockingly new low. I do not understand it. I do not understand it. So the internal keyword is just a way to mark functions as not being exported to the linker, which helps speed up your compile times, depending on what you're compiling on. But it's just a pound define to static. But I find that static is kind of a little overloaded in C, so I like to be more specific as to what I'm actually doing, right? There's like 3 different ways that static can be used, and so I don't really like that. So I just made one for each, so that when I use it, there's a different word for each one. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a macro for static. It's as if it is the same as if I had been typing that everywhere. Anyway, back to our Bobby McFerrin concert. Anyway, sorry. It's so terrible. There should be like the next Bobby McFerrin craze should be like the big thing that you're supposed to be into listening to music is like some crappy 10-year-old's like piano recital or whatever, right? Like, it's just garbage, but like for some reason you're supposed to pretend like it's actually good or something you would pay for. All right. So anyway, if we look at the create world function, we can get rid of everything here, but the problem we're going to have, I assume, if we just say like, okay, like forget all this stuff. I also don't know what end world gen, does that just clean us up here? Yeah. When we go to do end world gen, it's going to like finish up everything. And I think the problem is we haven't created anything, so there's no way where for like the player to stand. So I'm assuming that like we would just get an immediate like assertion or something very bad would happen, yeah, like you can see, like you can't even start. It just forces you to the cutscene, and you can't start the game, right? And so while we're working on the debug, while we're trying to basically view the debug map, we have to put in a little placeholder here that calls some of the old generation stuff or something, so that we can put the player in like a little room, just a little fake room, just so the game can start. And it's not like our code is like looking for some place to start the player and can't find it, right? So let's try to make something like that in the create orphanage call. We have this gen room nonsense, and all of this code is going to just get like vaporized like a hot sausage dog pretty soon here. I assume John's not still watching. He probably has much better things to do with his time than watch this stream, but if he is still watching, maybe... Okay, he happens to have shown up again. Can you tell us what... I got so confused. I thought Sausage Dogs Tends to Infinity was like a game that came out after Steven's Sausage Roll that was maybe playing on the name or something, but it wasn't like very popular, and that was it or something. But then I went, and the Steam page says that Sausage Dogs Tend to Infinity has never come out. It's still in development. So now I think I'm totally misinformed about Sausage Dogs Tends to Infinity. What is happening? Do you know what's happening with Sausage Dogs? I feel like you tend to know puzzle game stuff like that. Is that still going to be a thing? Is Sausage Dogs Tends to Infinity... Okay, you played an early okay, so maybe that's what I was thinking of, is like you had it or something, and I mistakenly thought that it was like a public release. Okay. All right, okay. No, all right, so I get it. I think I somehow thought that you had maybe were playing a public release of the game or something like that, and it got all mixed up in my brain. Okay. Okay. All right. So basically, that was just all my mistake. I was very confused about Sausage Dogs Tends to Infinity. So forget everything I said about that game. I was just totally wrong, and it probably was just a really early demo thing that I was thinking of. And I got very confused, thinking that was actually that it had come out already. But maybe Sausage Dogs Tends to Infinity will be the next big sausage sensation, if it does come out in 2023, I think is what the thing said. So release date Tends to Infinity. Yeah, that's game development, man, right? Games can go forever if you let them, right? At some point you have to say, I'm just not going to, because you could always find something else. Half-Life 3 definitely Tends to Infinity. I don't know if you're ever getting a Half-Life 3. All right, so when we create the orphanage, I want to do something here where we can do a room gen of just a crappy little room now, to have somewhere to place the player. This is an example of a thing that will generate a room based on one of these room gen parameter things here, right? And so maybe what we do is we just kind of like simplify it down a little bit so that we can call it directly, because it's probably mostly okay. The only problem is like when it iterates over the connections and stuff like that, we don't really have that concept anywhere, but most of the other stuff would be pretty straightforward. So that seems like plausible, right? So maybe like, yeah, looking at this, maybe we go, what's in the gen room thing? Maybe we just pass a gen room spec here directly. I delete this, and then I remove all the parts where you refer to the room itself, right? So this room volume here, I think this is a gen volume thing. Volume. So that's the room vol, and we just, you know, oops, nope. We would pass in the room volume. We would nop out this piece here, and we would nop out probably all of this. And I guess I'm not sure why that is. Oh, just because room vol. So I think that would just work if you called it, right? So I think that's all fine. And so this generate room, this old one goes away. You don't get to call that anymore. This generate world stuff is gone. It's not going to happen anymore. Goodbye. And then I think we're good to go. We can now call the room generator just procedurally, like in immediate mode, which is what we want. And for the orphanage, create orphanage call, we can do that here. When we create the orphanage, we need to be able to set the camera P here like so. So this little bit of spice probably wants to happen like, because we're gonna want a way to set this to whatever we want, right? Oh, Colax, I do use autocomplete all the time, though, right? I mean, right? So I mean, maybe you don't call that autocomplete, but I use it everywhere. Like, if I, you know, chunk, like, I do that all the time. So, I don't use drop-down autocomplete because that's, like, way slower because it shows you all this garbage and it's not, like, it's almost always wrong. But, like, just being able to quickly complete long words is very fast, right? I just don't like having things obstruct me, so I just use the tab multiple times. It's possible that something that placed the completions down here would be fine. But the drop downs are terrible. Like, I hate those. They're just really bad human factors. But I love autocomplete. I use it everywhere. So I am using autocomplete. I am not typing, like, when I do that, I'm not typing that somehow so fast that you can't see it. That would be cool. Maybe with Elon Musk's Neuralink, that is the future, right? Or something. But yeah, unfortunately, no, I can't type that fast. I use autocomplete everywhere. I just hate the drop downs because I think they suck. But I like autocomplete, and I wouldn't want to use an editor that didn't have autocomplete either. Like, I don't like the drop downs, but I also wouldn't want to not have any autocomplete, right? So yeah, Visual Studio is just so slow that you shouldn't use it. It's garbage, right? I mean, you don't use it because it's so bad, but the fact that it has autocomplete isn't horrible, right? It's just that it's just unusably bad autocomplete. That's the problem. Autocomplete itself is good, and I do recommend using it if your editor has autocomplete that is satisfying to use, right? So anyway, so I want some way of saying where the hero is going to start in general. So I do need some way to do that. In here, I guess what I'll probably say is, look, there'll be a generator volume for like starting room, and I'll just write to that with whatever room I want them to start in, so that I can patch it like at various times if I want to like warp the player somewhere at start, right? You know. So basically, instead of doing it this way, we just say, hey, the hero room is the starting room for Gen, right? Like that. And I'll just make sure I write to that with the right thing. We don't need that anymore. And then this will place the camera properly, and everything else should more or less work, you know, from there on out. So in here where we generate this room, we need to create a gen volume for the room. And we'll figure out how we're going to do that in a second here. In the meantime, this part of the generation is pretty easy because we have gen specs here for stuff like the rooms. And you can see there's a gen room super crappy macro that all this stuff is just way too complicated. Like basically what I'm doing now is just getting rid of it because we went too far down a bad direction and it's just not fruitful. So we don't really want to do this, but because there was no need for storing those things, right? But if we go ahead and look at the room spec stuff, you can kind of see here it's got a few settings in it and somehow actually needs a pointer to an apron spec, which is obviously also absurd. Just a lot of dumb stuff happening in here, right? But, excuse me. And what John Blow is saying is 100% how I feel as well, is that like most autocomplete designs are like very distracting right now. They're all this garbage that appears on your screen. And it's like the whole point is I should never not be looking at my code. Autocomplete is supposed to be that like I hit tab once or twice and I get the thing I was looking for. If I have to like visually scan through lists of crap, probably it should have been done in like a different way. Like put those on in a separate window away from what I'm looking at so that I can glance over to them. Maybe that's useful, but don't freaking stick it right where I'm trying to like look at my code. It's so distracting and it's just slower, right? Than I mean, I can understand for like programmers who don't really know what they're doing why that might be useful, because they're spending most of their time just trying to figure out like what method they might call or something like that. But like when you're actually, once you're at a point of proficiency where you mostly know what you're doing, you don't want like crap obscuring the piece of code that you're working on, right? It's like you're trying to sculpt a piece of pottery and someone's putting like a, you know, opaque sheet in front of you, and you're like, yeah, okay, like maybe the sheet has some useful information on it, but I'm trying to like work with this clay here. Could you maybe hold it somewhere else? And I'll look at it if I need to, but it's like, so it's very distracting, and it's not set up for the proficient programmer. It's set up for somebody who's going very slowly and not really doing much code, right? Because I'm sitting there staring at this window all the time. You know, how fast could it really be? So suppose I want some spec stuff in here, and let's just do, is it called a gen apron spec? So we'll call this an apron spec, and this will be called a room spec, and we're just going to do this apron spec, room spec, like that. Oops. And we're going to call this gen volume thing here, where we have it all. This probably will go to, you know what? We're going to get rid of that, because this is not how that's going to work. We really won't have aprons anymore because the forest gen will be filling those things in. So I think we can probably safely just say that the room gen thing can actually have the apron part taken out as well. Like so that room specs themselves just wouldn't have the apron spec in them, and they're just some stuff that like has some room generation garbage or something like that. I don't care. This stuff can all go away, and this is why I'm saying, like, you can tell that this code was stupid because it's forcing a bunch of stuff into like temporary storage that actually we probably only really need just briefly on the stack if things are done more procedurally, because this information, obviously, you don't need to carry it the whole time if you actually have the information at the time that you need it, rather than having to buffer it all up like we were doing. So I'm assuming you can do something where we just get rid of this stuff. Just delete it, right? And I don't think we care about this, having this at all. This create dungeon call, like, I don't want any more of this one. I'm not going to delete it entirely because we may want to grab things out of it for our new one, but I don't need to salvage that particular call at all. So yeah. So let's get this compiling really quick, and then we'll figure out what the actual room volume, like how the room will actually be set up for this test room. The generate room call, now I can surface to the H file the anachronistic loveliness of having to copy things to an H file. Thank you, C, for never fixing that in 50 years. It boggles your mind when you think about it, right? It's literally been like 50 years or something like that. And in all that time, neither the C or C++ specs have fixed the fact that you have to copy function declarations out to a separate file for literally no reason whatsoever other than they couldn't be bothered to fix it. Think about all the useless garbage they added to the C++ spec. It's hundreds of pages of useless garbage that they added, and they couldn't fix something that is a problem for literally every programmer who ever uses this language. They couldn't be bothered to fix it. Oh, yeah, they really fixed it with C++ 20 modules, all right. That sounds like a real fun... Real fun. What would you ship to the library then? I don't give a crap. Like, if you want to make it so that when you're done with your library, you copy the things out into an H file for library distrib, go ahead. But for a piece of code where this project is all compiled as one translation unit, the compiler has the entire file. There is no excuse for this, right? It should just be a given. At the very least, the spec should have said, functions inside the same translation unit do not have to be forward declared, right? It's absurd that you would ever have to declare a function inside the same translation unit as you call it. It's absolutely nuts, right? Absolutely nuts. The fact that you didn't fix at least that one case, which, by the way, is all the cases on Handmade Hero. We would never have to have forward declarations in Handmade Hero anywhere if they just fixed that one, right? If they just said inside the same translation unit, you do not have to forward declare your functions. That would have fixed 100% of the forward declarations that we have to do in Handmade Hero, right? But they just couldn't do it. They couldn't put on their pants and not end up with the butt where the crotch is, right? They couldn't do it. They can only, the C and C++ spec people only know how to have the butt on their crotch. That's the only way they know how to put on pants, right? That's the only way, is where the fly is where your butt is, where the butthole is. That's the only way they know how to put on pants. So that basically they pee the pants, they pee the butt of their pants, and they poop out the fly hole. That is how C and C++ specs work. All right. So what we want for the room volume here, because now we basically have what we need happening. We need to. This is not a pointer. Not supposed to be a pointer, people. We need to actually pick a volume that's not null, right? The volume has to be something that will actually have some substance to it so that there's a place to stand. But otherwise, I think we're fine. And we can go ahead and start debugging this way of doing the world gen, which I think is just more sane than before. That rant on forward declarations was enough for a sub. I'm glad I could provide the entertainment for you. We have to joke about it because otherwise it's just depressing. 4 or 5 decades of work on these languages, and they couldn't fix it. It's absolutely mind-blowing to think about that, to look at that from like the big picture, because all of those, they always come up with these reasons why they can't fix an obvious problem. And that is not how you get progress. Progress is not coming up with edge cases that justify keeping something obviously broken. You fix the broken thing and you deal with the edge cases some other way. Either by saying that now this is going to require a compiler switch that you have to enable, or you say that you have to put a thing at the top of the file that's like pound new mode or whatever. You fix it, but you don't keep making excuses. Everyone knows this is broken. And everyone knows it's been broken for decades. How? I just don't understand. Anyway, so we need to come up with a room volume here that has some kind of a plausible min-max that we can put this thing in, and it doesn't really matter what it is. So let's just say that the room vol is going to have a min of blah and a max of blah, and we don't care what it is. We presumably want it to be around 0, 0. In fact, I guess we have a gen orphanage location value here. So maybe what we want to do is like, do a v2s cast. Why is this not? Oh, there we go. Can we cast things to a v2s or is a v2u? Gen v3, can we, so can we cast those? Not really. There's too many, one of the problems with programming on stream is stuff just gets out of control quickly because you don't remember it, like when you're programming once a week or whatever on it. So basically like, running autocomplete IntelliSense. Well, yeah, I mean, I use this kind of stuff, right? So I can explore the APIs in a different way. Like when I'm exploring APIs, I use them, but I use them separately, right? It's autocomplete is not the place for it. It's a search that you should just basically like have a quick key to do when you're trying to do that thing. It just shouldn't be how autocomplete works. It's like conflating two things. One is like a documentation feature that I sometimes need if I'm unfamiliar with the system. And then the other one is just a typing shortcut. Like I basically know the thing, I just need you to like fill it in for me, And I don't want those two things in like the same system is the problem. But I do like being able to search APIs and say like, okay, show me like what are the connect calls or like what are these, where's this thing defined? And, I would like more of that if this editor was, more of a complete thing. I would like more of that, certainly. But I want it like when I want it, not when I'm typing, right? And so it's that mush together that always bugs me about the about the Visual Studio method, which is like, look, you're getting this whether you like it or not, right? So I don't know what I'm going to put here. I'm going to kind of hack this right now, but we should probably do something a little bit better in the future. But for now, we're just going to do something really stupid like this as we try to kind of bring this more towards a sensible conclusion. I don't know what this will do. Okay, well, it did exactly what I want, which is it went ahead and created a little room. All right. Well, that's good. It's a room that doesn't have any lights in it, so oops on that. But, you know, we have a little light on us that's illuminating the area, so that's fine for now. I'm going to go ahead and turn off colliders because we don't care about that right now. And that's something that can be, you know, we'll deal with that when we're doing more collision-y sorts of stuff. So I'm going to turn off colliders, and the only debug stuff that I'll leave on for now. Oops, that's entity gen. I want entity.cpp. The only stuff that we'll leave on is just those debug rooms so that we can start to look at that whole process and see whether that's doing something sane or not. All right. So here's what we generated, right? And, you know, it sort of did what I asked for. It's true, but I think I just dramatically misjudged the distances. I like that we're still... Okay, so for some reason, we're still drawing our lighting debug. Again, streaming. It makes it hard to remember all the things that you're doing in your code at any particular time. Let's turn that off because we're not working on the lighting at the moment. So why that's being drawn, I have no idea. So I would say the main problem here is just it's too close. These need to be more diffuse and spread out further. So I think I just had, unless I have some kind of bug in how I was drawing those or whatever, I more or less want those values to be tuned probably quite differently than they were. So these numbers were way too small or whatever the heck. And probably this is like more like this, I guess. And these are probably more like that. I don't know. I'm not really quite sure what these values should be. So I'm kind of just arbitrarily picking crap here. That, you know, yeah, this is one thing I was worried about. We can end up in a scenario that cannot be solved by random picking is obviously one problem too. So if this might be too much. So if this is basically negligible, this should start quickly, right? And you get placement, yeah, like that. I am a little concerned at the fact that nothing seems to be placed in this quadrant ever. And I wonder, is that because our random number generator sucks? Or is there something else going on there? But then as this value gets larger, it becomes harder to place things because you have to have more separation between them. And I don't know to what extent that becomes a problem. So let's try some other numbers here and see what happens. Is there some... Let me just make sure there's no... Well, make sure there's no bug. That's good. But try to ascertain whether there's any bugs in how this would be doing. I mean, one other way to phrase this is just to generate this, like, add the orphanage position in after, which I think is actually what we want to do. This is actually a little bit off here. So it's more like displace P and dungeon P. And dungeon P is like the orphanage P plus the displaced P. And then this can just be written more intuitively, right? Like that. So we know that we're generating this, and then we use it as a displacement off of the location of the orphanage to get the locations of the dungeons that we want. Oops. I don't know what happened there. So that may now be a little too aggressive. Like if we look at how many, that's probably a little too far to go to get to the dungeons, maybe. Maybe. Hard to say. But maybe we bring it back a little bit. And that seems not terrible, right? I mean, I could see that, you know, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to the closest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know. That feels like I could make a plausible argument someone was going to play that game. Right? Like that doesn't look totally ridiculous to me. I mean, I think that's basically fine. Is this gen number always locked currently? Yeah, let's unlock the gen number so that we get like an actual some kind of randomization. Not 100% sure where we set that. So it's going to be this guy, right? I would assume. Right. Although I don't actually see this getting past. There it is. So if I wanted to do, so it's like maybe I'm thinking like we'll do a thing here where we now start to actually pass the seed in. Don't get me wrong, we want it to basically be like 1, 2, 3, 4 for debugging purposes. We want to be able to debug like specific world seeds, so we want to set it for most debugging. But while I want to see a few different one, yes, that was Banjo-Kazooie. Dun, 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 dun. Right? It's Gruntilda. Yeah, I mean, those of you who caught that it was Banjo-Kazooie were like completely correct. So anyway, when we do create world, we're probably going to have to pass a seed in. So we're going to have to move this up the chain slightly, right? So basically, this will get, you know, like a random seed here. Maybe something like that. And it gets passed in here. Then when we do create worlds, and so we're doing, you know, a game thing, this will have to be able to get some kind of entropy and I don't know how exactly I want to do that, but I might say, like, I don't know, do we really care if it's hardcore? Probably not, but we could do it hardcore anyway. Where we actually get the entropy from the platform layer. I mean, we might as well. So, you know, when we do it here, you know, we could pass the 1, 2, 3, 4 if we're trying to do the debug thing, but what I would like to do here is have it be able to pass something better. So, like in the platform layer, where we've got so maybe here, right, in this like input thing, maybe we've got entropy that comes in. So that basically the platform layer is responsible for feeding you some entropy that you can use to generate worlds and know that they're going to be, you know, fairly randomized. So, you know, maybe there's like entropy in here. And the only thing... Wow, bad typing today. So, you know, it would do something like... pass in the initial seed, and when you go to hit play worlds would have... an initial seed that can come from the actual random state of the machine. So we would do a thing like input, and probably, you know, it would be like initial seed equals 1, 2, 3, 4 in debug mode, right? So we would do something here that's like overriding it for when we're debugging. So we'll leave that there, and we'll do initial seed here. We'll put into the initial seed the entropy we get from the game layer, and we'll say input entropy requested. It's true, so that the platform layer knows. Now, you may be asking, what is this about? What is going on here, right? And the answer is, so entropy is random bits. The best possible case, the bits are completely frickin' random. Like, nobody could ever figure out any pattern to them. Not with an infinity of machine learning and cryptographers staring at it and whatever. They're just literally every bit is a 50-50 chance of being a 0 or a 1, and there's no correlation at all. That's like pure white noise entropy. It's just complete garbage. There's no pattern to it, right? That's the best thing to use for random number generation because you know that there was no initial bias in the way the bits were laid out. So you know that any crap, any bad distributions that you're getting are your fault, not the seed, right? So that's what you want for entropy, and the problem is entropy is hard to produce. Computers are deterministic beasts. They're made to sort of try and produce predictable results. So typically you have to take a step back and go, wait a minute, we want this thing to be unpredictable, and you have to figure out a way to get something unpredictable out of it. This can be kind of expensive. Some chips have entropy built in. For example, Intel chips have a thing called RDRAND, which will produce what they claim are entropic bits, for example. There's other ways of doing it, watching user input, clock drift, weird things like that. There's all these ways of doing it. Using a lava lamp. Lava lamp entropy. People make a camera and they use the lava lamp motion, which is apparently very chaotic. I'm not making this up. So really, it's a real thing that people do. Probably as a joke, but they do it. So the point is, you won't always have a completely free source of infinite entropy. So unlike other things, you only want to ask for more randomness when you actually need it. You don't want to just sit there and bleed entropy out of a system for no reason. So what I wanted to do here was make it so that it would basically request entropy from the platform layer only when the platform layer actually needs to produce it. And then in here, when it looks at stuff, right, when it goes into update and render, it looks at did you request a quit? And we'll also do did you request entropy? And if you did, then we will, fill that out. I don't remember how the input thing works exactly. I don't remember what gets copied in here. So I need to quickly just check to see how these input things work. I think they're kind of dumb. Yeah, they kind of are. But so it kind of does a ping pong thing. Between them. So I think what I might do is say entropy equals blah. Something like this. And then every time at the top, so when we first start out, when we actually just, initially begin our run, then I would say okay, we'll probably do a thing here where we generate the empathy. That's good. Yeah, there's no empathy generation. Certainly not here, but we do entropy generation. So we do an entropy generation, and anytime we use one of these input doodads, we set the entropy for it as we go. So before we dispatch to the game here, we just do new input entropy equals entropy, right? So it always has the latest one. And so then we just need a function that we can use to get some entropy from the hardware or the operating system. And really, that's probably on Windows just going to be bcrypt, right? So, it's going to be something that looks like this. Probably going to have to include bcrypt. With the Tiznop. Win32 Handmade. I don't know where this stuff gets defined. Oh, it's right here. Right. So basically, we're gonna have to call bcrypt for this, and I never remember the crazy Windows function names. Win32 bcrypt. Nope, not that one. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, where is it? There it is. So this is a Windows function call that will basically use, in theory, whatever a sane strategy is on the hardware that you happen to be running on, which you don't really know what it is because you're running on top of Windows, so you don't know. But it will use, RDRAND or the PCI bus or whatever the heck, they've got something worked out that some cryptographers have hopefully spent a lot of time looking at, and that isn't trivial to break. So it should be more than satisfactory for just a world seed, right? Now, we don't actually care about most of this stuff because we don't care, like I said, we don't really need we're not doing cryptography. So if the randomness isn't perfect, we don't care. We just need something vaguely good enough. So here we're going to do, for the two buffers, the address of a buffer is either a random number. So we're going to say put it into result. We want it to be the size of that result. And then here we just need, for the first parameter to bcrypt, we need an algorithm provider, but we don't actually want to specify an algorithm provider. So I can't remember what you do to work around that. I'm afraid to say I don't remember. Alg handle pointer to, it wants a char. Looks like there. Yeah. So I don't really know. Can you pass a 0 there? Am I being totally flippant? Maybe I am. I don't know. And then we have to link with bcrypt because it's its own lib, right? It's bcrypt lib. I think it's bcrypt lib. It's something like that. So now I don't really know if that works because I don't know if we need to provide some kind of constant for the algorithm handle. So I just want to see what this does here. I mean, hey, it looks pretty random. I don't know if it's really that random. Okay. So if we look, here is a layout of some rooms. If I restart the game, like so, there's another layout of rooms. It really seems to bias towards this side, which worries me a bit. I mean, that could just be my imagination, but I do kind of feel like something's afoot there. Which, I would like to investigate. That could be our random number generator is super sucky. I don't remember what's in there right now, but maybe that was just luck of the draw. Because now maybe it doesn't seem as bad. Yeah. But anyway. I think that's good enough for now. So I think maybe that's where we end it. We're in good shape Now, next week, maybe what we do is we flush out some of those rooms now and connect them up, right? So that's the next step, and that'd be pretty good. And you know, I'm happy with that. I don't really see any practical problem with us moving forward with the next step of level generation, so just turn the crank next weekend. So I think that's about it. All right, thanks for joining me, everybody. I will end the stream here, and we will go look for someone to raid. Thanks for joining me, everybody.